Meanwhile, a number of parties have expressed reservation on the inclusion of UCT Professor Richard Calland on the three-member panel. The two others are former Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo and Gauteng Judge Thokozile Masipa. For more on this, we're joined now by EFF MP Yoliswa Yako, DA National Spokesperson Cilliers Brink, as well as Political Analyst Professor Dirk Kotze. I beg your pardon. We asking for your thoughts as well tonight on 072-110-5584. Should the National Assembly Speaker reverse the appointment of the panel? What are your thoughts tonight? And you can tweet us and give us your reasons. Good evening and thank you very much for your time, all of you, for coming on tonight and being a part of this conversation. Yoli, so let me begin with you. We have three people in the panel, one person's credential making people uneasy as it seems. Is that reason enough to reverse this whole entire panel, or is this just merely a storm in a teacup?
I think it's more than enough reason. Firstly, because opposition parties were given an opportunity to recommend names, and none of those names have been considered. Firstly. Secondly, one of those names, which is the name of Richard Calland, is on record supporting Cyril Ramaphosa. So how can it be that we have an independent panel, but the panel is not independent in that we know what they're thinking, we know who they are rooting for, we know where they stand as far as Cyril Ramaphosa is concerned. So it is concerning because it then puts a cloud over the entire process of this investigation. Yeah.
Prof, can we maybe expand a little bit on how important is it, the makeup of a parliamentary committee or parliamentary panel of this nature, and how oppositions view the makeup of that panel? How important is that?
It is very important because they are the ones who must decide whether they or must recommend. They cannot decide, but they must recommend to what extent, whether there's a prima facie case against, earlier on it was the public protector. It was obviously a different panel, but this time it's now President Ramaphosa. Then they must submit their report to the Speaker, which then presented to the National Assembly, and there the first real decision is taken when the National Assembly must approve it by a 50% plus one majority. So but it is a preliminary investigation, but what they are presenting to the National Assembly doesn't mean that it is the final say. So but it is a very important step, certainly.
Yeah. So the fact that nominations of majority opposition parties have not been considered here, according to the EFF and according to the Democratic Alliance as well, how important a role is that? In fact, does it make mockery of the consultation process with political parties?
As I understand it, the Speaker received 70 nominations. I'm not sure about exactly these three who nominated them. Most of the nominations are those of judges or former judges, which is different from the panel, for example, for the public protector, where there was only one judge, and the others was an advocate and a lawyer. So in this case, it is slightly different. It is actually now loaded with two judges and one academic, a legal academic from UCT, Richard Calland. But still, it is ultimately the Speaker has the final say, but as the rules of Parliament says, she must consult with the parties, and that's what they have done. Whether this is going to set aside or sort of disqualify this panel is something we will have to see. I think the fact that the chairperson is a former Chief Justice, Sandile Ngcobo, must give some weight to this panel. Ultimately, there is the panel must reach a decision which can have minority report also, but I guess they will try to get a consensus in this process. So it's not that one person can dictate this whole process.
Cilliers, let's bring you in here, and that's one of the points that has been raised, that you have three people, one of them, maybe you may be concerned about, but there are other two. So if the one would seem to be favoring President Cyril Ramaphosa unjustly, they would be outvoted anyway.
Well, it's not as easy as that, because the entire process has to be beyond reproach. And it's not just the fact of independence and objectivity that's important here. It's the reasonable perception of independence and objectivity. Because if this impeachment process is not beyond reproach in the view of ordinary people, then it affects its entire credibility and integrity, and that is a constitutional problem. So the DA is not concerned by the fact that none of our nominees were appointed to the panel. That's not our objection here. It is specifically about the suitability of Richard Calland. And we believe that based on his public pronouncements, his social media posts, there is a reasonable apprehension of bias on the part of Richard Calland in favor of President Ramaphosa. And so he doesn't meet the requirements of Section 89. We're not attacking Professor Calland's integrity. We're not questioning his credentials as an associate professor in law. What we are saying that in addition to his career as a legal academic, Professor Calland is also a very outspoken political commentator. In fact, he was a political commentator long before he was appointed by any law faculty. And he routinely plays into the political fray, which is his right. He should be able to do that. But it is our job as the official opposition to point out how this could affect the integrity of the process. And that's what we're doing. And we're asking the Speaker, as our Chief Whip Siviwe Gwagube did in a very carefully worded letter, to consider this so that we avoid unnecessary and damaging controversy before we even embark on this process.
Yeah. Why would, Cilliers, in your view, the Speaker select someone who cannot be viewed as independent, in your words, by the work that they do in public? I mean, you had 17 people, and there is some report that indicated that only 7 made themselves available. You might correct me here, I could be wrong. But why would then the Speaker be tied up to this particular individual who might not be viewed as independent because of the public work that he does? Is it because there was very little to choose from, or was this a deliberate, I suppose, orchestration on the part of the Speaker?
I do not, Tabu, want to impute any sort of motives to the Speaker. That's not where we are at the moment. Where we are is in the consultation phase. And we're pointing out to the Speaker that she has made an oversight. She has not taken into consideration the facts of the matter, and we're asking her to reconsider her decision. So, we're not playing political games with this. We desperately want to find out what exactly happened at Phala Phala. We want to know to what extent the president perhaps contravened the law. And because we find this process, or we regard this process as so very important, we don't want its credibility tainted at the outset. So we're not pointing fingers at the Speaker or accusing her of bias, but we're saying that if she goes through with the decision to include Professor Calland, that it might, well, in fact, it will create a reasonable apprehension of bias on the part of this panel.
Let's take a break and take your thoughts. 072-110-5584. Should the Speaker reverse the appointment of the panel? Or you can tweet us tonight at Newzroom 405. Yoliswa Yako says on Cilliers Brink, as well as Professor Dirk Kotze. In Focus continues shortly. Yoliswa, should we assume bias just purely based on what, for example, Professor Dirk Kotze would have said tonight, and it would be an analysis that he is making of the situation right now? What would mean he would be biased in a situation where, for example, the ATM believes there's sufficient evidence that exists? In fact, it's uncontestable evidence that is there. So the panel has got a very easy job. There would be really no space for bias.
I feel it honestly casts a shadow over the entire process. If we are going to have a questionable candidate being put in the panel, It certainly questions the motives of the speaker, and honestly questions the agenda behind the entire issue of Phala Phala, because we have been asking for accountability from the get-go. We've had to take steps as opposition parties, and now when we are at this step, now we are being delayed by another step of having to say, no, we cannot have a questionable candidate with an independent panel, which is going to put a cloud over the entire process. So it certainly does put a question on the part of the speaker, because it is the prerogative of the speaker to appoint. So basically it says that she has disregarded the entire process, because obviously she is advised by whoever is advising her, and they would have known that Richard is questionable in his opinions of the president. So it certainly does cast a cloud, because it says that the entire process is basically run at that level, and no amount of consultation is going to happen, and no amount of regard for the people of this country, as well as opposition parties who form part of parliament, who account to constituencies, is concerned.
So do you think the consultative process was a farce? I mean, the name of Professor Richard Calland, one would say, did not come from the ruling ANC. It came from one of the opposition parties. So it would not have been something that would have been designed by the ANC itself.
No, I would say that it does. I think I just want you to repeat your question again.
I'm saying, it was the consultative process a farce, in other words? Was it just merely a box-ticking exercise?
It seems like that is the theme, because as you've seen with even the appointment of the Chief Justice, opposition, the commissioners made suggestions. None of those suggestions were taken into consideration. The majority asked for this, and then none of that was taken into consideration. So it speaks to the same theme, that the ANC will do what it wants to do, because obviously they would have seen who the candidates are, and they would have seen who is for the president, and they would have known had they done the research, which they did. So they know exactly who Richard Calland is, and they know exactly what his opinion is on the president. And that is the issue that we have, and that you cannot have someone in such an important panel, in such an important investigation, which will set the tone for this country in terms of corruption, in terms of even the highest position in the country. If we cannot do that at this level, then what does it say about the rest of the country?
Now, Elisa, as opposed to the Democratic Alliance, you want the reversal of the whole entire panel, not necessarily just the one. Of course, you've raised concern and disgust, actually is the word that you use in your statement, on the one Professor Calland, but you would want that whole entire panel reversed. What are your reservations and concerns around the members of the judiciary?
No, the issue is, once you put, I would say, if I would say it in Xhosa, it wouldn't be understandable. But if we make it Phala Phala, the entire thing is spoiled. So let's start from the beginning. Let us then do proper consultation, and let us have the people that are qualified to do the work that they're supposed to do in terms of this panel. Yeah.
For the benefit of Prof. Dirk Kotze and Cilliers Brink, the best I could come to what she's saying is one rotten potato or tomato spoils the bunch. It's something to that effect, is that Kotze saying. Prof. Kotze, can we just assume bias just purely because of what one has said in the past? Are we not getting into the realm of speculation?
Yeah, but I know I think in that not that point correct, but I think one should take it actually further, and that is that, any person who is sort of in the public domain, people like me, like what I'm doing here tonight and so on, almost automatically will disqualify us to be on a panel like this. Whether it is in terms of bias or independence or neutrality, or the fact that you have been associated with one party or the other. The panel of 3 members should be people who have not made any pronouncements up to now about the person that's affected by this. And I think judicial people, persons, retired judges, and maybe not even serving judges at the moment, or not judges who have heard court cases that affected some of these people, should be involved in this, because it is such a critical first step. And it sets the scene for whether the ultimate process is in the end regarded as free and fair, legitimate and above board. Obviously, in the end, it is not a legal process. And I think this is something that when we talk about impeachment, it is done in Parliament. It's not done in a court of law. So the same rules, for example, don't apply to that of a judge when they do this. But it should be, in terms of the rules of impeachment and the intention of impeachment, as a constitutional mechanism that deals with the executive and members of the Chapter 9 institutions, that it must be above question. It must be above any questions about legitimacy or credibility. And I think the fact that we've reached this point with two of the main political parties in Parliament questioning this now, I think we have already actually reached the point where it will have to be reconsidered by the Speaker and the whole process itself. Otherwise, it's going to jeopardize the outcome. Whether the rest of the process is above board, this first element of it is really going to be highly problematic for the process itself.
Yeah. From what you're saying, Prof, I mean, it means, in fact, a number of the members of the judiciary, including the Chief Justice himself, would probably not be eligible if he's in retirement to sit in a panel like this, because of the nature of our politics and the lawfare that we have seen in the political space. A lot of the judges have made pronouncement around political issues and issues that affect political parties. Does that automatically disqualify them to be independent in instances of this nature?
No, not necessarily. I'm more talking about persons like, for example, in the case of the public protector, if they have heard a case of an application of the public protector. In this case of President Ramaphosa now, if there was a case which dealt with where he was one of the applicants and it was one of the key, he was one of the key applicants in that process, that it was the president versus someone else. And it was a sort of a very important judgment that was made either in his favor or against him. So I would say these are elements that one should take into account. Obviously, no judge can be completely removed from the situation. But what I think what is important is that they must not be involved in some other remarks that they've made or judgments that they've made about the integrity or the way of functioning of some of the key players in a process like this.
Yeah. Cilliers, there are some parties who would actually want to see this panel sit as soon as tomorrow. This particular issue that you're raising through the letter that you said your chief whip has written to the National Assembly Speaker, and of course the issues that the EFF are raising, would mean that this process is undertaken again, and to some it would represent delays. Would you say it would be better to delay the process than to be hurried up into putting this panel together?
Well, when it comes to an impeachment panel who has to consider whether there are grounds to remove the president, I would say only fools would rush in. There's no sense in making a hasty decision here just to get things done very quickly. We do not believe that the presence of Professor Calland in the first selection of the speaker compromises the other panel members. We think they're above reproach. They haven't expressed themselves publicly on the inside politics of the ANC or the merits of a Ramaphosa presidency. They haven't called anybody counter-revolutionaries, as Professor Calland has unfortunately done on Twitter, with reference to the conferences of the ANC. And so it's just this one panel member who is a problem. And once again, it's not a matter of the DA insisting that our nominees be included in the panel. They haven't. It's a matter of the public perception of bias, a reasonable apprehension of bias, which is clearly present here. And listen, Thabo, you can go to a number of law faculties in this country and find preeminent professors of public and constitutional law who have not expressed themselves on the politics of the ANC or the DA or the EFF, or made controversial comments. And those people would be perfectly acceptable. It's really just a very small subset of law professors, as one example, who double as political commentators. And so it's not a difficult choice. We don't think that the Speaker has run out of choices to make in terms of the initial selection. And so if it takes a little bit longer to get this right and to make sure that if this panel makes a decision, for example, that there isn't prima facie evidence against President Ramaphosa, that you don't have politicians running around with the screenshots where Richard Calland is making these political statements and saying, well, it was fixed from the beginning. It's all about the public perception. It's about the public trust. And we really think that the Speaker of the National Assembly must think carefully before she takes her next step.
Yeah. Yoliswa, you are, as the EFF, comfortable with the fact that this could probably be delayed by, I don't know, another 7 days or 14 days, I don't know what the time frames would be, while the work of the committee itself would be taking another 30 days, or the work of the panel itself. There's been other concerns, for example, that this needs to happen before the ANC goes to its conference in December.
The EFF is not concerned about a conference of the ANC. What the EFF is concerned about is holding the president into account and making sure that this panel is above reproach and making sure that this panel is independent and that it performs its duty well and that its recommendations are respected. And for that to happen, the Speaker needs to rescind and take back this panel that she has put up because it does not, it's not credible. It's clearly not credible because there's one person in it who has clearly demonstrated that he's in support of the president in numerous platforms, in numerous spaces. He's even written think pieces promoting the president. So therefore, whatever it takes, if the Speaker wants the people of this country to take Parliament and us seriously, the Speaker must go back to the drawing board and remove this entire panel.
Yeah. And Prof. Kotze, I mean, what does this say then in terms of how we elect and put together objective, independent panel to do work that has got to do with the executive?
Yeah, I think we have to remind ourselves this is only the second time that something like this is happening. The first one was with the public protector. They was on their way with President Zuma also, but that didn't happen yet. So I think it's a learning process for everyone. The rules of Parliament dealing with this process don't specify, except that they say it must be South African citizens, that they must have legal and other competences in order to deal with this matter, but that's more or less where it ends. So it's relatively vague, open-ended, and I think what we are learning now through this process is the interaction between the Speaker and the different parties of Parliament, of how that process ultimately must happen, and to what extent it should be left purely in the hands of the Speaker, or whether there should be a type of a collective decision-making process, which at the moment is not prescribed, but might avoid in future maybe something like this situation. I think there should also be some precedent developing over time about some persons who they should avoid to appoint on panels like this, and what we discussed tonight, I think, is part of that debate of what should be, what will be ultimately acceptable and be trusted by the public in general, because this is, as I've said, in the end, it is done by Parliament. It's not done by a court of law. And these are the representatives of us who must ultimately take the final decision.
I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on, Professor Dirk Kotze, EFF MP, Yoliswa Yako, and DA National Spokesperson Cilliers Brink there with us. Continue to take your thoughts at Newzroom 405-011-072-110. Is where you can send us your WhatsApp messages. Right, In Focus continues with your leading stories in the morning. Stay with us.